Hello and welcome to a Bartholomew School English Literature GCSE revision video. This one is on Lord of the Flies. So we're going to look at the kind of question that you'll get in the exam, talk you through what's rewarded in terms of marks, and then give you some ideas about what an essay might look like. So here's an example question. The first thing to notice is there is no passage underneath it. There's no page of the text. So unlike the Macbeth and unlike Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all of the quotations are things you have to bring in your head. So here's the question itself, this example one. How does Golding present the character of Jack in Lord of the Flies? Write about how Golding presents Jack in relation to other characters in the novel, how Golding uses Jack to explore ideas within Lord of the Flies. So they give you a main sentence and then a few bullet points which gives you the basic sense of how you might divide up your time. There are 30 marks plus another 4 marks, that AO4 4 marks, which is for technical accuracy and your vocabulary. So let's break the question down. The key word is how. They want to know technically how these ideas are put across. They're not asking you to describe the events. They want to know, as a writer, how does Golding get these ideas across? And for that reason, Golding will almost certainly be in the question as well, and you'd be well advised to use the author's name in what you write. So Golding does this, Golding wants us to feel, Golding's theme is, Golding's technique is. When you do that, you're showing that you realise they're not real people. So the word what is absolutely not in the question, and it won't be. It'll be how are things done. So what sort of things are you given marks for? The first assessment objective is exploring concepts, ideas and themes, implications, and giving precise quotations for 12 marks. That's quite a big chunk of the marks. Basically, they want you to show that you've thought about what you think Golding's message is. What are his themes, his ideas, how does he want us to feel, that kind of thing. As examples, could be rules in society, civilization, barbarism, savagery, violence, brutality, nature of evil, survival of the fittest. So if you can talk about themes and ideas and what he's asking us to think about, you can't really go far wrong there. On top of that, you need your quotations to prove that these things do actually take place in the novel. Now, assessment objective 2 is pretty much what you do with the quotations. So analysing Golding's methods and using correct technical terms and exploring the effects of these methods upon a reader. So you're talking about Golding and his techniques, Golding and his ideas, and showing this is not a real life story, it's a novel, and he's used various techniques to get these ideas across. Now these can be quite large techniques or quite small ones. So they could be things like symbolism and motifs. Motifs are repeated images, so we could talk about the conch shell or the painted faces. You could talk about setting, that's a technical term. Characterization, which is the way in which characters are put forward. So are they put forward through being described, through their actions, through their dialogue? You can talk about the tone and mood of particular parts of the novel. Structure, dialogue, lexical choice, nice easy one. Narrative point of view, so it's all told in the third person, but it's quite sympathetic towards Ralph. And when you're talking about quotations, show you can give detail. So talk about verbs, adjectives, adverbs within a quotation. If it's a metaphor or a simile, let them know that you know that. Again, that's 12 marks, so that's a pretty big chunk of the marks. Exploring connections between the novel and its context. Ideally, this will be done integrated into the essay. So in other words, don't write a paragraph at the end which does all the context. It should come up naturally, and ideally it should be something that you say about a quotation. So you're analysing a quotation and then you make a link between the quotation and the setting of the novel originally. Could be things like the fact it was written in the 1950s, so not long after World War II and the Holocaust. That might affect Golding's view of humanity. You could talk about the Cold War, which has gone hot, as they say, in this novel. It's turned into World War III. Maybe psychiatry, what's he saying about human psychological processes? Faith in technology, there doesn't seem to be very much really. When they get hold of a knife, they kill each other with it. Presumably, if they had an atomic bomb, they'd start the World War III, which is already happening. You might think about Golding's career as an English teacher, the jingoism, which means the kind of over-patriotic love of their country. So they say some pretty ridiculous things about how, being English, they're the best people in the world, just before they do terrible things. And you might think about 1930s charismatic fascist leaders. To what extent is Jack a bit like a sort of Hitler figure? Somebody who has scapegoats, somebody who creates fear amongst the little uns. They're all terrified of the beast. He says he'll protect them from it. And his charisma, rather than democracy, takes control of the island and leads to lots of violence. And finally, there's 4 marks for the accuracy and sophistication of your written style. Don't think and don't presume that you can't prepare for this. You'd be wise to go in with words and phrases prepared for each of the characters and themes that you know are going to impress an examiner. And your English teacher has a sheet to help you do this. So ask them if you're a little bit anxious about having sophisticated vocabulary. So there they all are together, and as you can see, the 2 main things you're looking for are your ability to come up with interesting ideas and prove them, and then talk about technically how Golding gets his ideas across. And then for slightly fewer marks, context, and then your actual style in which you write it. So now we're going to look at another example question. This one is more focused upon a theme than a character like the Jack one. How does Golding present ideas about savagery in the novel? Write about how Golding uses characters and events to present ideas about savagery, and Golding's attitude to savagery on the island. So savagery is obviously the key word. How is always going to be a key word. And we're looking at Golding's attitude, so taking a step back from the book, not just writing about Piggy's attitude or Ralph's attitude, but what do we suppose is Golding's feelings about what happens in terms of savagery. So I'd probably be thinking in terms of maybe 3 sections to this, 3 sort of chunky, large, best part of a page paragraphs perhaps, thinking about 3 topics, maybe 3 events or 3 characters I could write about, and I'd be jotting down what these would be. So for example, I probably want to write about Jack. He's quite a good character to talk about in terms of savagery. Maybe the mask. Might bring in Roger, his predilection, which means he's predisposed to be violent. He's wanting to do it right from the start. Maybe how the island changes them. They're sort of liberated, but they already had it within them. That might be allow me to talk about setting. So the island seems idyllic, but it obviously isn't. It brings out the wildness in them, the savagery. I might want to say that Golding, one of his techniques is to compare Jack with Ralph. So Ralph seems to represent civilization, and then maybe I can talk about the conch shell, because that seems to be a symbol of civilization. Piggy seems to be more intellectual and daring. He might get contrasted as well. Maybe talk about Simon, the whole head on the post, the pig's head, the Lord of the Flies, how that represents beasties, and that the beastie we find out is actually them. Simon finds out that the beast is inside them. Maybe Simon's death might be a sort of climax in terms of savagery as well. So I'll be jotting down very briefly my ideas. Okay, I'm going to take you through an essay now, and you'll notice on the right hand side as I'm reading it, when it does something good that an examiner would like and would give a mark to, a little box will come up, which is what the examiner would be thinking when they were reading it. So here we go. One of the main techniques Golding employs to present the theme of savagery is a series of contrasts between characters. Right from the start, Ralph and Piggy represent aspects of civilization and law under threat on the island. Golding exemplifies this in the symbol of the conch shell. For Piggy and Ralph, it is described as a talisman, something which has an almost magical appeal, as it signifies aspects of their previous lives they wish to retain. For Ralph, this is order, law and social cohesion. shown when the conch is sounded for an assembly of the boys and discussions of how best to make progress as a group. However, Golding tells us that the conch, while beautiful, is also fragile. This adjective clearly foreshadows the vulnerability of the values of decency and structure the conch represents. Like Piggy's glasses, a symbol of science and intelligence and hope, they're needed to light the beacon fires, the conch shell is destroyed by characters who only follow their own individualistic, primitive urges. In breaking the conch and glasses, the boys are rejecting rescue and rejecting the values of their old lives which restricted their savage aspects. Although Jack exhibits a desire for power right from the start, ordering the other choir boys around, his descent into actual violence shows the power of the island to bring out latent savagery in the boys. As soon as the hunting starts, Jack is said to have a bloodlust to kill the pig. This abstract noun suggesting an impulse which he finds difficult to control yet seems to lead to satisfaction for him. Indeed, later we are told that the desire to hunt was overmastering him, almost as if he has been taken over by an external power. If the conch represents order, then Golding uses the painted faces of the boys to represent savagery. We are told this mask offers a liberation into savagery, the lexical choice of liberation implying that the savagery is welcomed, perhaps even enjoyed, and was latent inside the boys, waiting to be released. They reinvent themselves as savages, the mask metaphorically hiding them from remorse or personal responsibility and allowing them to be morally anonymous. Ralph offers the hope of law and rescue, but Jack allows them total liberation. The escalation of violence, from the killing of the pigs onto the murders of Simon, then Piggy, shows Golding structuring the novel to indicate to the reader the inevitable slide into savagery. Golding seems to be suggesting that humans are no better than animals and would quickly revert to the immoral behaviour of animals without the restraints of externally imposed law and order. The hunting of humans begins as a game, then becomes something out of control, much like the development of the boys' behaviour in the structure of the novel. When they attack, Golding describes them as showing the tearing of teeth and claws, clearly using imagery to imply that, freed of any civilizing forces, they have become primitive and animalistic. There is an irony that such savagery leads to the death of Simon, as he's one of the few characters who is able to articulate the savagery within the boys. While the little ones fear a supernatural beastie, Simon comes to realise that the true beast is actually waiting within the boys for liberation. Golding uses the novel form to explore this in a strange scene with the Lord of the Flies engaging in dialogue with Simon. This perhaps represents Simon's intellectual realisation of the potential evil within his peers. Indeed, the character tells us that Simon has an ancient, inescapable recognition of the truth of the Lord of the Flies. The adjective inescapable, suggesting that Golding feels that mankind is doomed to savagery. In another irony, the boys most reveal this true, violent inner self when wearing the masks of their painted faces. The fact that Ralph ends the novel as the solitary boy capable of resisting the liberation into savagery emphasises Golding's bleak view of humanity. The vast majority of these well-groomed and privileged public school boys, future leaders of the nation, utterly reject his appeals to civilise. Indeed, when the naval officer offers rescue at the end, Golding is reminding us of the savagery of the world the evacuee boys are escaping. The Navy are presumably engaged in World War III, which had seemed a likely occurrence when the novel was published in the 1950s. The island thus offers a microcosm of a Cold War era world destroying itself. With Jack's stick pointed at both ends, a puny adolescent version of the atomic bombs savagely unleashed across the world by equally savage superpowers. The boys will now return to this world, having shown that they are totally in tune with its self-destructive urges. Although Golding tells the story from a third-person narrator's point of view, Ralph seems to be the character through whose perspective most of the events are viewed. Charismatic and decent, he is the reader's best hope within the novel. Thus, when Ralph ends the final chapter weeping for Piggy in the darkness of man's heart, we are left with a bleak conclusion that savagery is the natural order of things for all humans, not just this collection of schoolboys. Having survived the slaughter of World War II, Golding does not see much hope for the species in a nuclear age. Okay, it's not perfect. A couple of the quotations aren't quite right, but that does all of the things that an examiner would want to see. Now, in terms of the AO4, so the technical accuracy and the vocabulary, if there are any words in there and you weren't sure what they meant, why not look them up, because you know now how you would use them in a sentence. So, how do you prepare for this? How do you prepare for each of the assessment objectives? So the first one is about having ideas. So you just need to make sure you have ideas on all of the themes and all of the characters. There's no character that you can't say what they represent or what Golding is trying to do with them. And obviously you need to collect quotations, and importantly quotations which allow analysis. A quotation that says that Jack is angry isn't going to help you very much because the language is boring. So it has to be language that's a metaphor, or that's got some hidden layers that you can show off and squeeze. You'd also be advised to prepare your vocabulary. Don't just say that Jack is horrible and Ralph is nice. Get some better words which are more precise and are going to impress the examiner. For AO2, which is you talking about details and being technical, again, get key quotations which allow analysis, and also have some bigger things like dialogue, setting, symbolism, structure, the narrative form. It's told in the third person. Why is it not told in the first person? Because we wouldn't find out some of the things. How would we know what happened to Simon or what happened to Jack in the jungle if it was all told through Ralph's perspective? So have some planned ideas that you know you can talk about, and certainly learn some quotations you know you can talk about. So for context, you should have a short list of the things that you probably will be able to talk about. And have you got quotations that you know link to that context? So is there a quotation about Jack and you think I could probably link this to people like Hitler and Mussolini because it's showing the sort of charismatic, violent power and threat that he brings with him? And how does the context link to particular themes and particular characters? So again, Jack, 1930s, charismatic fascist leaders, the way that they destroy each other, the way they essentially set light to the entire island. You can link that to the fact that the whole world's going up in flames in World War III. These sorts of sheets, which your teachers should have given you, are asking you to collect quotations, and they should prove really useful. With these sorts of revision sheets asking you to think about context, theories, vocabulary, quotations, everything you would need to be able to write about that character. You should also have a copy of this, which takes you through all of the main contextual areas for Lord of the Flies, and asks you to think about links to the novel in an ideal world with a quotation. If you want to get a 7, 8 or 9, I'd aim to have a quotation that links to World War II or fascist dictators, that kind of thing. Hope you found this useful. If you're missing any of these sheets, go and see your English teacher and we'll try and sort you out. Okay, that's us done.